So back to our story on water. We've been looking at the relationship between water and wealth. We are looking for a story on inequality and water. And we've been using the Social Sustainable Society Index to look at changes between countries and within countries over time. So this map is showing the change in the water situation in a country from 2006 to 2016. And we can see that the countries that are dark blue have had a significant increase in their percentage of their population that have sufficient access to water. And the countries that are orange or dark orange have had a decrease. So from our calculations, we found that Cambodia here has had the biggest increase in the world in terms of percentage of people in the last 10 years who have gained access to sufficient water. Other countries with big increases are Ethiopia, Libya, Mali, and Paraguay, for example. And then the orange countries are countries that have lost percentages of the population that have access to sufficient water. Algeria, Sudan, Yemen, and also this little island, Haiti. However, we've discussed how aggregate data can hide trends and make things look different than they are on the ground. We can't make statements about individual people living in these countries based on aggregate country level data. For our story on water and inequality, we need to look at data that is within the countries. So we'll start looking for different places that might have data at the individual level within the countries we're interested in. Here's the World Bank. Here's UNICEF. Here is water.org. There's many different places that have data on water, and we settle on the DHS program that's run by the USAID. One of the reasons that the DHS program data is so valuable is that they collect data on individuals and households over a long amount of time. So here we are looking at a data summary on Haiti, and you can see they have data back from 1994. So this is the percent of populations using an improved water source in Haiti, 59% in 1994 up to 64.5% in 2012. So this data will likely be very useful to us for looking at what's going on within the countries. And we're going to look at the top two countries, two of the top countries, and two of the bottom countries. We are going to get the data from our countries, Cambodia and Mali, where we've seen a significant increase in the percentage of the population that has access to water, and Haiti and Yemen, where we've seen a significant decrease. And so now that we've downloaded the DHS data and brought it into Tableau, these are now data on individual people instead of data on countries. So now we can make statements about individual people within these countries. We have a variable that asks whether or not the person has access to improved water. We also have a variable for every single person that asks about their income, not income in exact amounts, but income that is then used to calculate whether they're in the lowest, the middle, or the highest income bracket for their country. So if we drag the variables into the rows and columns and we add a little bit of color that make it more clear immediately, we're using red to show that they do not have access to improved water, and green to show that they do have access to improved water. Again, you wouldn't use these colors in your final product. We're simply using them for our own internal exploratory purposes. You can use any colors you want. Tableau has many colors available. Now that we've set this up, we can see that how individuals have access to water varies greatly within countries over time by wealth. So this is very helpful data for our story on inequality and water. In Cambodia, which has had the largest absolute increase in water across all the countries in our data set, people of all income classes have increased over time, lowest, middle, highest, but the rate at which they increase was much greater as the wealth was greater. We can tell this by looking at the lines. The slope of the line, the angle at which the line changes, tells you about the rate of change. Lines with greater slopes indicate faster change, and lines with flatter slopes indicate slower changes. You can see that the wealthy line is much steeper than the poorest line. The rate at which wealthy individuals in Cambodia are getting access to improved water is greater. Mali is one of the other countries that we're looking at in terms of our detailed data, and these trends are much less straightforward. Mali's had a big increase in the proportion of people with access to sufficient drinking water overall, but it looks like that increase may have come almost exclusively from wealthy people having access to more drinking water. If you look at the line in the poorest section, you can see that these people have really not increased and have actually at sometimes declined in their access to water. So this is why you can't make statements about individual people when you're looking at data from the country level. But if you're looking at this data, which is person level data, we can make statements about people. Of our two countries who've had significant drops overall, so Haiti and Yemen, they show interesting trends as well in terms of equity once we look at the individual level data. In Haiti, the wealthiest people have experienced an increase in access to improved water, even though the country as a whole has experienced a decrease. The Yemen situation is bleak at all levels, but it is the worst by far for the people at the poorest levels. This is only the beginning of what we can do with individual data. We can also go into the DHS data and ask questions about how changes are affected by rural. So these people are now divided by rural and urban, rather by wealth. Or we can look at many, many variables at the same time. We're now using the DHS data for Cambodia only to look at the intersection between the location, the wealth, and the sex of a person in their likelihood of getting water. This is just an example of how deep you can go with the data to tell the stories. And you do this simply by dragging each of the variables to the column shelf, and then the dependent variable or the water variable to the rows. And you can look at it like a bar chart. You can add reference lines if you want to see, say, maybe what the and how each little subpopulation relates to the average. You can also use the different types of visuals. This is, again, back to the box and whisker plot. This is only looking at rural and urban. Rural and urban. Then if we want to see what it's like for men and women that are rural and urban, you can see, that's looking different. And then if we want to look at how females living in a rural setting, going up the wealth scale, you can tell a lot just by looking visually at this. What do these lines look like? What does the female line look like compared to what the male line looks like? What does the female rural line look like compared to what the female urban line looks like? And do they end up in about the same spot? What's it like to be the richest urban woman versus the richest rural woman in Cambodia? And you can see there's a much bigger difference between the poorest rural woman and the poorest urban woman than there is between the richest rural and the richest urban. So these act as pointers about the type of reporting that you might want to do on the ground. You might want to try and find one of the poorest and wealthiest rural women in Cambodia and talk to them about how it is they're accessing water. Why do they have more access to water? Is it political? Is it social? What is influencing this inequity? I often run through these steps over and over really quickly in order to land on a story theme, and then we get the reporters on the ground collecting the narrative and field work to try and find the human stories behind this data. And then while they're in the field, then we do the more complicated, more rigorous, more detailed statistical analysis that will be used in the final story.